Hello, welcome back.
Welcome back, everybody.
So, today we are going to jump right in. We're talking about our next emotions to our series, our next emotion to our series, which is drumroll,
Judgment.
please.
Oh, I already said
Oh, there you go. Judgment, yes.
Yes. This is an important emotion, I feel like, to talk about because I don't feel like this emotion or even this word really, like judgment, we use it a lot, but we don't actually a lot of times know all of the definitions or like how it really impacts a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want to start off by talking about the definitions?
Yeah. So the word judgment has actually a few different definitions. So I'm gonna start with the one that we are gonna eventually talk. Like this is how we're interpreting it, and when we're gonna spend most of our time talking about it. So that would be judgment, according to Webster's dictionary, is defined as the process of forming an opinion or evaluation by discerning and comparing. And generally, when people think of like, don't judge me, it's usually around this kind of definition.
Mm-hmm.
Another definition that is equally as important, and I think we'll also touch on a little bit, is the ability to make considered decisions or come to sensible conclusions. And this is about you having or you being able to make good judgment or judgment about things. Maybe not good necessarily, but make judgment about things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another definition that's really commonly used is a formal utterance from an authoritarian or authoritative person or opinion. And this is usually related to court. So they always pass usually a judgment in court. So a decision is made that's usually has extremely long-lasting effects and consequences. And this last one is, of course, probably where this actually word is originated, I would imagine. But basically, if the J is capitalized, according to Webster's dictionary, it basically means the final judging of humankind by God,
Mm-hmm.
or like a calamity held to be sent by God, a divine sentence essentially from God.
Mm. Okay.
I think that has to do more, obviously, with spiritual beliefs and philosophical ideas. But it's interesting to want to know like where this word actually probably came from, and I imagine it's been around for a really long time. So that's just something I think that's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. It's a long-term relationship.
Yep. So why don't we talk a little bit about when we think about our or what we're thinking about, which is of course is the process of forming an opinion or evaluation,
Mm-hmm.
and like comparing or discerning, as well as like the ability to make those considered decisions and come to hopefully sensible conclusions. When we think about judgment in that way, what does it look like in your opinion when somebody is being judged?
So this is an interesting one for me because I think it's so close to home. For me, you're asking what it looks like. So, okay. I've been told when I was younger that I have RBF. Do you know what that stands for?
No.
No, okay, it's resting bitch face.
Oh, I know what that means.
So, okay, so I was only told a few times, but I can imagine. I think now, especially doing a lot of virtual Zoom meetings and workshops and things, you get to see your face, and I think as I don't know. I think for judgment, for me, it shows a lot in my eyebrows and my eyes. It looks a lot like people assuming things based off of what they see and hear or how someone acts. That's what I relate judgment to looking like. Um, for me personally, my experience is when someone else judges me as a white person and assumes I've had a certain experience because of how I look, which I think is very relevant right now with the social movements going on and all of the politics and everything. What do you think? What does it look like?
Yeah, I think you're touching on like two. So like when I see it happening to someone else, like how I see judgment happening is usually there's a lot of nonverbals happening, people giving looks to like, so I imagine like, okay, like very cliche, there's a girl and then two other girls, I'll just say. And like the two girls, and I imagine like them judging this one girl, they're probably looking at each other, giving each other nonverbals. Like I kind of different kind of like looks from the eyes and maybe some eyebrows, kind of like you were saying, and then potentially whispering to each other, etc. The other person who is being judged now, the feeling of being judged, I imagine would look like a sense of sadness, maybe, as well as self-consciousness, hypervigilance that happens, and then fear of safety potentially, depending on the person. So for me, I feel like I know that I have judged people like I'm human, and definitely when I was younger, was not as socially aware as I am now. So I would definitely judge people. I mean, I was definitely not a bully or anything like that, and luckily I was never bullied as well, so I didn't really have that experience. But I know that that's where when we're little and think of judgment, that's usually what comes to mind, because it's quite common, like you get judged a lot by peers. And I'm sure I got judged by peers, but they didn't vocalize it to me. And so I didn't have the experience necessarily of being judged in that way, but I definitely got judged in other ways, like academically. We have to do speeches or presentations, and there is the teacher essentially judging us, but I feel like in those situations, those were definitely peer. I was definitely like more focused on peer judgment when I had to do presentations and such. And that usually felt like a lot of anxiety and a lot of self-consciousness and a lot of uncomfortableness.
And people judge you because they think, well, you're in school, you're doing all these degrees, so you should be good at it.
Yes. Also judgment on that.
You should be comfortable with it.
Also, or like when I was younger, I was really quiet. So people thought I would actually be bad at public speaking because I was so quiet most of the time. But I wasn't that bad at it. Like, it's not like I was bad at it. That's not why I didn't like doing it. I think I was scared of being judged by people, more probably for how I looked, maybe, because teen years I definitely was more self-conscious of physical aspects of myself, and I think it's quite common for most
developmentally.
Yeah, I think just teens, everybody's really they're being judged by how they look most of the time, right? Like if they have the newest clothes that's like in style, or like a certain hairdo, or certain pair of shoes, certain backpack, like that kind of stuff, right? Judgment is running rampant usually in junior high and high school.
I think with this, one of the most important things that I've kind of considered with this emotion is to possibly consider judgment as a spectrum rather than as this binary experience. Because sometimes, in my opinion, judgment can be good. Sometimes when we judge, a situation that doesn't feel safe, and it doesn't feel like it could end in a neutral outcome, at least, if not a positive outcome, then we can use our judgment to say, okay, this is what I know based off of experiencing these things before. So what decision can I make to help stick to my boundaries, honor my boundaries, and then move forward? Because sometimes judgment can keep us feeling safe. It can keep us in our containers of what we know we're comfortable in, what we're familiar with. It doesn't always mean that it's going to be this super negative experience.
Right. I think that's a really good point. So that's like that other definition of judgment, right? The ability to make those decisions. I think that has a lot to do with lived experience, what we call like common sense, has a lot that plays into it. And I feel like, to be honest, people of color probably have more of like that common sense lived experience type of thing, because they've usually had to learn to overcome certain obstacles, and maybe different people of privilege might not have had to have learned on their own.
So yeah, I agree. It's non-white folks, and then also folks who have experienced trauma, which I do believe we all have, but that also is on a spectrum, right? It can be, doesn't mean that one is bigger or less or more than the other, but I do think that trauma can influence certain privileges that you have or some certain privileges that you don't, and then how you operate in the world based off of the how you go about judging certain situations, right? Because of the trauma you've been through.
Yeah, I want to say, like, I've seen judgment go both ways. So I've seen like a person of color judging maybe just like a Caucasian person who maybe didn't know how to do something that might have been like, how do you not know how to do that? It's like like laundry or something like that, like common sense kind of thing. I mean, you get those experiences more in college years when people start living on their own, and then you can start witnessing like what people know how to do and don't know how to do and such. But like I feel like it can work that way, where a person of color might be judging somebody based on their privilege, right? Because like they didn't have to worry about that, so they don't know how to do it. But there's this negative judgment on the person for not knowing how to do something. And then I've seen it work the other way also, where a white person's like, why can't you just do that? Like, not recognizing the barriers that a person of color may have in front of them that make it harder for them to just do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is more of, there's this aspect of empathy, and then there's an aspect of speaking up, you know, because when you're coming from a place that's less privileged and you're pointing something out, that's, to me, I don't know if I would consider it as judgy. I think I might consider that more as unveiling privilege, because I think sometimes,
Yes, but the definition of judgment is the process of forming an opinion or evaluation. So it would technically be judgment, but it would also be pointing out that there's privilege happening.
I see. Okay.
The other way around, you could also point out the fact that is privilege happening as well, right?
Right. Yeah. I was going to say something, I lost it, but so we've talked about what does it sound like? What does it look like? What were the other ones?
What it feels like.
Yeah, I think so. This judgment for me is so close to home because coming from a biracial lens, multicultural lens, I don't really know the experience or what it's like to not come from a place of assuming. I mean, because I of how it feels when I receive it, I really am adamant about not putting that out there onto other people, because that's literally been my lived experience. So for me, the feeling is so strong and so important that it really corrects, or sometimes maybe overrides how I move about interacting with other people, because to the point where maybe sometimes I need to, remind myself, you have an education, you know what you're saying, you know what you're doing. But it's just really important to me to be really mindful of those things, because for me, judgment, when I feel it placed onto me, whether it's coming from a place of, well, I have this judgment, so I'm going to approach you with the judgment, but I'm also going to remain curious. So whether it's someone from that lens towards me, or just simply just judging me based off what they see or how I'm acting, Because, you know, when you see someone in a glimpse of just how they act for one moment, and then you can judge them based off of, oh, this is how they are, you know, and maybe they're just having a rough day. Maybe they, you know, something rough
Yeah.
happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think those feelings and experiences have been so strong for me because I've felt so much labeled, so put in a box, and as if I have been, my freedom has been taken away from me to be
Mm-hmm.
all parts of me, you know,
Yeah.
that I just really find it to be important not to do that to other people. So I think when I feel it, it's this sense of something has been taken away, or, you know, I've been silenced or minimized or put in a box. I'm sure I could think of more. What do you think?
Well, I agree with that. So I'm thinking of that last definition about how it's this final judging of like humankind, right, by a higher power, essentially. But so like the term implies that there might be some like judgment and fear for me, like are associated. Um, Fear of like kind of what you were saying, like right, you question your own knowledge or your own authority, your own confidence, etc., because there's a fear of being judged, right? There's fears associated with it because judgment essentially is bad. Like the term has this negative connotation, right? Negative association, like that to be judged is a bad thing. And usually there's a lot of negatives associated when somebody is being judged, right? Somebody somehow feels they have the authority, opinion, or whatever to their ideas on you almost. And kind of like you're saying, box you in, right? And like really decreases your creativity, first of all, but also it changes how you think about yourself sometimes if that person has enough power.
Of course, right? Of course. Throughout my experience being in this doctoral program, and I guess you can even say master's into the doctoral program since I went to the same university, I have been in a position where I've unknowingly put people who are, you know, the professors who, for my culture, they're seen as higher up, you know, someone you respect. But even just without taking the culture away, in a sense, they do have power over certain things that we experience in that program. So in a weird way, I really didn't mean to do this, but I've been in situations where I've been open and expressed certain feelings that I experienced due to certain experiences with the professors. And they've actually said, thank you for reminding me of the power hierarchy and the privilege that we hold in that position, because I could understand why you would feel so blah, 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 you know? And those have been some of the most powerful experiences to me, when someone can say, I feel like this is a good example of what you're saying. Because I feel as though that's a moment of clarity, that's a moment of understanding, that's a moment of maybe even growth, or it could be healing, you know. So
yeah, because they may not be aware that how they may say a statement in their being human in a judgment place, offhandedly, not really considering their position of power, but a student may hear that and take that to heart, and that might impact how they think or feel about themselves, or, you know, have lasting impacts that maybe that person may not have considered or even think ever again about, but the student will remember it.
right. And that's why I like this concept of imagining or being thoughtful of judgment being on a spectrum, that it's not binary. It's, which again reiterates the whole concept that we try to work with with our clients, is emotions are, they're just emotions. That doesn't mean that they're positive or negative. They just are, you know. So I wonder what it looks like for people to consider, well, if judgment is on a spectrum, what does that mean for my relationships? Because for me, that means, well, how is the person that I might be the closest to, how are they viewing judgment? How are they feeling it? And if I'm owning the fact that, yes, I put judgment, can that actually turn our relationship around? Can it allow our relationship to go deeper? You know, there's so many opportunities or directions that it can take you in a relationship with someone else, no matter if it's platonic or not, or whatever type of relationship it is.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Recognizing if you are placing judgment, even if they're not a friend, with somebody maybe in your workplace or at your school or just in your life, a family friend or whatever, who you may have been placing judgment on for whatever reason, considering that feeling of what it's like to be judged, and maybe trying to take a step back and just consider looking at this person from a different perspective and seeing if that changes how you feel or think about that person.
Right. And these things take, because I think what we're talking about is it takes some time to be able to consider our own personal patterns. Because if I can imagine if someone says, well, if I'm just giving everyone the benefit of the doubt, you know, like, oh, they come from this lens, that's why they did that or whatever. What about me? Like, what if it just perpetuates this idea that I'm minimizing myself or not honoring my own experience? And I think it's more about recognizing both of those things. So it's what you're saying, where is this person coming from, and maybe why did they land on this type of judgment towards whatever's going on, and also where am I at in my on my path, on my journey, to be able to recognize this, because then maybe between those two things, you know, people can come together and say, okay, I see where there are these different lived experiences. I don't know. I think it's just holding space for both, you know?
Right. And I think that's a good kind of segue into, well, because you bring up self, right? And self-judgment is a huge thing that a lot of people experience, judging themselves because they're doing what we call like comparing, right? Or evaluating themselves and forming, you know, using opinions of others, maybe society. We can talk about this at a macro level, right? There's
Right.
like definitely these messages from society about expectations for people, and so then a lot of people may be engaging in this self-judgment that they are not at that place in their career, or they don't look like that model, or, you know, they don't wear those brands, like those kinds of things, right? That really, self-judgment can be really harmful to your mental health.
And it can prevent us from, you know, moving forward, or even just being able to understand what safety means to us and what it feels like to us. I appreciate that piece too, because I know for me, I definitely for a long time engaged in self judgment, and I still do on time, depending on what's coming up for me and what I'm triggered with, doing the whole comparing or judging myself on how I reacted to something or how I chose to go about something. And that is difficult, because in that space we get into the whole people get into the mindset of deserving, that word deserving, which I don't think love and deserving go in the same, they don't fit into the same sentence, in my opinion. But yeah, I feel like that touches on a whole other kind of deeper topic as well.
Yeah. A lot of people place self-judgment based on their past lived experiences. And so, for example, survivors of trauma, you know, like specifically maybe child sexual abuse, they have a place, like they've sometimes will, not everybody, of course, sometimes will place some self-judgment on self for that, having had that experience, as if they somehow are marked in a negative way by it. And that ultimately leads to more feelings of, when we think about shame and kind of detachment, rejection, those kinds of emotions. But like that sense, like they place self-judgment, sometimes they place self-judgment, some people, on having this just experience of their past, which they didn't really have, I mean, they didn't have control over. And so now they have judgment of themselves because of having that experience.
Right, they blame themselves.
Mm.
And that's a good point because it does start with us. It starts with in terms of how we're engaging with our relationships. Because if we're pointing something out in another person, it is because we have unresolved feelings or thoughts or unprocessed thoughts of our own lived experiences and of our own things that we judge about ourselves. That's typically why other things stand out in other people, is because we have some sort of feelings about it in ourselves.
Or along like just some insecurities maybe
Mm-hmm.
related to something along those lines, right? Or some fear around some things, right? So like well, maybe insecurity / fear. Like for example, just going back to this idea of judgment from God. I mean, like a lot of the times people of certain religious backgrounds will say that it's being gay is like wrong and place this judgment on it, right? And I think that's born out of a place of more fear and maybe insecurity. And maybe it's because they haven't questioned their own sexual orientation as well. We don't know that. But there's like a lot of different things, right? For sure. Fear, insecurity, things along.
I also think it can be even relatability, because if I'm pointing something out in someone and I'm judging them and saying, oh, wow, this person must be really educated. They must, it goes that way too, right? They must have a lot of privilege, or maybe they don't have a lot of privilege, but you're recognizing that. That could also be because of your own personal experiences that you relate to with that certain thing you're pointing out, right?
Mm-hmm. Or like, so I see that, and then I also see like the lack of relatability. Right? Is that what you're talking? Is that kind of what you're saying? Like, if somebody doesn't relate to somebody else, they're going to judge that because they don't really actually have that. They don't know or have that lived experience, so they really can't relate to that. So they're making judgment based on their own lived experience.
Well, and also if they can relate to it. Like if I'm talking to someone new and I hear that they identify in a certain way, and so then based off of that way, I'm judging, oh, they must like this or they must like that, or you know what I mean? And that's something that I'm relating to. That's
right.
because it's something personal to me that I like or engage with or whatever it is.
Yeah, I guess, judgment is just part of the human experience in that we all make judgments. Now, to the level of which those judgments, kind of like you were saying, right? It's a spectrum. So I think that definitely differs for people. But I think it's very part of our human nature to make judgments about things. And like you said, sometimes it's for survival reasons that we're making these judgments. And those should always, I think, be acknowledged and recognized. And we should always be mindful about our decisions we're making. And especially if we're making judgments, we should really be thinking about why am I thinking this way right now? Where is this coming from? And mostly, will this be helpful or benefit me and the community, hopefully?
Well, and it's also okay not to be, because if we're in a space where we do need to protect ourselves,
survival for sure,
right? So then it goes, it's both, just considering, okay, honoring the space where you can create more thought with what's going on, and then maybe making a decision if that's the case that you need to do or whatever. But I think that's where we get into these difficult situations or complicated situations where someone is being scrutinized or someone's being put down. And it's because we're not creating that space for both. We're not creating space for all of what's going on, or all of the sides, or all of the lenses or perspectives or experiences. And we're not comfortable sitting with that. And so because we can't just simply honor the time to sit with that feeling, we have to make up all this other stuff we have to throw on top of it. We have to bury all of the main problem or not problem, but main experience that happened. We have to bury it with a bunch of other problems. So I think it gets complicated because that's what we're used to seeing on social media, especially in politics. And yeah. So it's like these extremes,
Yeah. Well, I think that was a very good conversation about judgment. And
yeah.
There's a
Chapter
lot
making.
that can go into that conversation, actually. I didn't
Yeah.
realize.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for listening. We have one more emotion to talk about next episode in our emotion series. And so we encourage everybody to share, follow, like, subscribe, and thanks for listening.
See you next time.